Ability. My name is Joel Fisher. I'm the author of a book called Film-Ability, A History of Disability in Cinema, and this is a podcast all about disability in cinema. I hope you enjoyed the show last week. If you have any questions or anything that you think that I've left out or got wrong, then please let me know, because I just want to open the conversation. Thank you for listening if you did listen last week, and thank you for joining me this week if this is your first time. Okay, well, with all that out of the way, this week's movie is Mercury Rising, an action movie from 1998 about an autistic boy who cracks an NSA code and is targeted for assassination. It's directed by Harold Becker, a director best known for Sea of Love, Malice, and Madonna's Crazy For You music video. It also features a score by John Barry, a composer best known for the Bond movies, and Outer Africa, and Dances with Wolves. So I'm going to go through the plot like I did last week, and I'm going to go through the aspects of the film which touch upon disability, and perhaps explain a bit more depth about what went wrong, what could have been better, or what was pretty good. Because there are parts of the movie that do actually portray autism properly. So the film opens with Art Jeffries, played by Bruce Willis. He's in a bank robbery situation. He's undercover. He's trying to protect a teenage boy who's part of the gang, and he's also trying to calm down the emotional leader of the gang. And he's also trying to convince the FBI to give them more time so that they can get things together, and he just doesn't want anybody to get hurt. Unfortunately, the FBI does come in. They send in a SWAT team, and they kill all the bank robbers, including the teenage boy. So the job is done, and Art Jeffries is the kind of undercover cop who's a bit of a loose cannon. So, being overwhelmed by his emotions and his tendency to not play by the rules, he goes outside, goes to his supervisor, and threatens him with a gun and punches him. This leads to a meeting with a boss higher up than the supervisor that he punched, and Art Jeffries is told that he is to be demoted to desk duty, despite the fact that they may not have really thought through that Art would have been traumatised by seeing somebody he was trying to protect getting killed in front of him. Anyway, years later, we go to a school. Simon Lynch, a little 9-year-old boy played by Miko Hughes, is autistic, and his teacher encourages him to further his intellectual skills by giving him a puzzle book. She's very kind to him, and it just sort of seems like he's part of the class. Later at home, the audience is introduced to Simon's mother, Jenny, played by Kelly Hazen, and his father, Martin, played by the great John Carroll Lynch. It's all very sweet and especially touching, although it's implied that Simon doesn't really have any friends, but it is shown that his parents love him very much. Then we go to the bedroom as Simon is shown opening the puzzle book that his teacher gave him. He looks through it, and there is a sort of word search, but it's got numbers and symbols in it as well. So he looks over it, and suddenly something sparks in his mind as a close-up on his eyes shows with the camera, and he immediately goes to a telephone and dials a number. He gets through to the NSA and speaks to a couple of men one called Dean Crandall, played by Robert Stanton, and Leo Petransky, played by Bodie Pine Elfman. There are a couple of cryptologists who work for the NSA who thought it might be a good idea to put this puzzle in the puzzle book in order to... I don't know really. It's not really explained. They just sort of think it's fun and that nobody would ever get through to them. But they do. And so Crandall and Petransky go and tell their boss, Lieutenant Colonel Nick Kudrow, played by Alec Baldwin, and he's really angry for them to do something so reckless. For some reason, it puts the project's in danger, Project Mercury, and they want to know why it's happened. And what happens there is one of the worst expository-laden conversations you could possibly see, because they're all trying to figure out how a child could have figured out a puzzle and led him to call a number that led to them. Although, if they put the puzzle in the book in the first place, then they would have thought that somebody must have seen it somewhere or figured it out somehow. So, but considering the child is so young, they don't know how it could have happened. So they start to speculate. And this is where the exposition comes in, because it immediately tells the audience that they deduce that Simon must be autistic. And this is where the problem is, because there have been a lot of representation of autistic people in the media, and unfortunately, sort of late 80s, early 90s, that kind of thing started to happen, in particular with the notable Oscar-winning movie Rain Man, which I will cover in another episode. But the consensus of the general public, and indeed the filmmakers of Mercury Rising, seem to be that all autistic people must be savants. And there was no other level ever portrayed, so this sort of forwards the plot. However, in reality, and I hope I don't have to say this to anyone listening, because really you should know by now, but people are being diagnosed with autism all the time, and there are certainly levels of autism that affect people in different ways. The common traits of autism are that they may find socialising confusing or tiring, they can become overwhelmed in loud or busy places, and they may have intense interests. They usually prefer order and routine, and use repeated movements or actions to calm themselves or to show their happiness. However, just because characters like Simon Lynch and Raymond Babbitt are shown to have severe difficulties in communicating and interacting with the world, doesn't mean that all autistic people can be affected that badly. A lot of autistic people's behaviour can be indistinguishable from other people who are not neurodivergent, and which can sometimes be the reason why autism goes undiagnosed, particularly in women. It also doesn't help that depictions of autistic people are usually men, further misleading people into believing that it couldn't possibly happen to a woman. Also, autistic people are known to mask, a term used to mean that some autistic people hide their traits in order to fit in with the rest of the world. Anyway, Kudrow finds out where Simon lives, and because the plot has to happen, he orders a hit on Simon and his family. Another plot point that never makes sense, because the audience is never told why this has to happen. An autistic boy calling a phone number and getting through to the NSA is no reason to think that he's a threat to national security. The audience is never told why he's a threat, why getting through the number is so bad, nor why the only answer is to put a hit out on a 9-year-old boy. By this time, I imagine the audience are fully on Simon's side, which is good, but it makes zero sense that somebody from the National Security Agency would do something so extreme, and it makes the character and the plot feel very two-dimensional. If Kudrow's only motive is that he wants to keep his job, surely there are other ways of going about it. However, it turns out that Kudrow would prefer to blame somebody else and use his status to try and brush his actions under the carpet rather than taking responsibility for them. Anyway, two assassins called Peter Burrell, played by L.L. Ginter, and Shays, played by the great Peter Stormare, are sent to kill a 9-year-old boy, and unfortunately Simon's parents had to go too, leaving him alone and the audience feeling sorry for Simon as he's so vulnerable. Although going back to Art Jeffries, we see him in an office, he's told about the murders, and he goes to investigate. It seems that perhaps his demotion has been a little bit exaggerated. So after talking to the investigating team at the crime scene, Art finds Simon in a crawl space and takes him to a protection ward in the hospital, where a nurse tells Art about Simon's autism, and that because he is neurodivergent, it makes it hard for him to communicate. and therefore he cannot be questioned. Meanwhile, because of Kudra's invested interest in the case, he tracks down Simon to the hospital and sends Burrell to finish him off. He disguises himself as a doctor, and that fools Art momentarily, but him and Simon manage to escape. They get onto a train, and Shays is still in hot pursuit, and despite a little downtime between Art and Simon, Shays still tries to get to Simon, but is promptly booted off the train to his certain death. After all this time, though, it seems that Simon still doesn't trust Art, and although like every other good boy, he's been told that anybody he doesn't know is a stranger, even if that frustrates Art. Although it seems that because of the time that they spend together, he might be making a little more progress. This also brings up the issue about how Simon is treated. Art had little to no experience of dealing with an autistic person, and probably only knows about what he's seen in the media. In fact, the entire movie overlooks how an autistic person like Simon is probably the worst person to be involved in an action movie because of his sensitivity to overstimulation from chaotic activity and loud noises. And Mercury Rising certainly does a lot of them. Despite the gunfire, the shouting and the movement and the noise from the train, Art has seen no other option than to manhandle Simon on several occasions. Although these times are to take him out of danger, the overwhelming sensations that Simon must be feeling, having his life thrust in and out of danger in a small space of time, in reality could cause a meltdown. In reality, if an autistic person does experience a meltdown, then there are a number of ways that they can be helped. They need to be told that they have support. You can also try to match their energy, be loud if they're loud and quiet if they're quiet. It also helps to be patient while showing your support while they recover. Often objects can help them to vent their energy to make them feel better. Or if you don't know the person that well, just be observant of what objects may help them to do that. Also, there are different triggers, responses and needs that an autistic person may have. So after they've calmed down, it may help to discuss them. You should also avoid asking them questions while they're experiencing meltdown or giving them information or instructions. Meltdown can sometimes be because of an item of clothing that is irritating them as well. So if it's okay to do so, you can help to remove their item, and unlike what happens to Simon after he's taken to the hospital in an ambulance and then transferred to a bed, you should never restrain an autistic person because it will only make their situation worse. You can also practice strategies with them after they have calmed down so that they can remember what to do when they experience meltdown again. Anyway, back to the movie, and Kudra has decided that the best course of action is to frame Art for the kidnapping of Simon. But once he gets wind of it, FBI agent Tommy Jordan, played by Sean McBride, doesn't believe that Art could do such a thing. So when Art asks if he can borrow Tommy's car, he agrees. This is the moment in the movie where Art finally gets an ally, somebody who the audience is not familiar with, but somebody who they know have been on Art's side as he was previously in a scene where they're investigating the murders. There is even a sweet interaction between Simon and Tommy's son. However, one of misunderstanding as Simon is shown obsessively spinning the wheel of a toy car which he is holding up close to his face. However, at this point, Simon and Art certainly do have a break from all the action that's going on around them, and whether there's an intentional choice by the filmmakers or not, Simon is doing something which could be considered stimming. Stimming is a term used by neurodivergent people when things are getting a bit out of control and they need to focus on something to feel calm. So an object that has a moving part on which they can concentrate all their thoughts and actions can help somebody to center themselves and feel more normal. More recently, fidget spinners have become popular because of this, and it doesn't only help autistic people. Anybody with any kind of neurodiversity can benefit from it, including anxiety. So realising that the best course of action is to go back to the scene of the crime, Simon once again picks up the puzzle book, finds the puzzle that he has solved before, and again goes to the phone to dial the number. After talking to Crandall and Brodowski, Art arranges to meet with Crandall, but he doesn't leave Art with Tommy because he's putting his family's life in danger. So after a somewhat awkward situation, Art arranges it so that he can leave Simon with a woman called Stacey Sebring, played by Kim Dickens, who's just a random woman that he meets in a coffee shop. And the thinking behind this was that he thought that nobody would ever find him with her. However, if they managed to get to Simon in the hospital and find him on a train, then who knows what could happen, really. Also, it does feel very presumptuous that Art sees a woman, albeit an attractive one, and instantly assumes that because she's a woman that she's capable of taking care of a small child. There may be a lot to indicate a possible romance between Art and Stacey, but that's never played out, and honestly, it will be a lot for a random woman to process after having so much responsibility thrust onto her. So, Art arranges a meeting with Crandall, who starts to tell him about the Mercury encryption project, but in typical thriller style, before he can reveal too much information, he's shot by Burrell, who has been sent there by Kudrow after he finds out about their phone call. Again, we're not really sure how he's getting all this information, but it moves the plot along. When Pojanski finds out about his friend's death, he writes down everything he knows about on a typewriter in order to send it to Art and the Senate Oversight Committee. But wouldn't you know it, Burrell once again turns up out of the blue and kills Pojanski on sight, taking the letters. However, all is not lost, as Burrell didn't pick up every copy, and once Pojanski's girlfriend, Emily Lang, played by the great Carrie Preston, picks up the letters and takes it to the FBI and to Tommy Jordan, no less, he arranges to meet with Art to show him the letter, which has Pojanski's fingerprints all over them, making them key evidence in the case. Although even at the time it could have been easier for Pojanski to email the FBI rather than write down a hard copy, it proves that perhaps that's a better course of action, because the fingerprints are physical evidence to prove that it's from Pojanski. Art now sees the time is right to track down Kudrow to his home, and what do you know, it's his birthday. So after breaking into the house, Art confronts Kudrow in his basement and threatens him unless he announces on national TV that the Mercury encryption project has a failure. And he does all that while hitting him where it hurts, in this one collection. This puts Kudrow in a corner, thinking that there's nothing else he can do, and he's going to have to take desperate actions in order to save his reputation and his job. Meanwhile, Art has arranged Simon to go into a witness protection program, but Kudrow intercepts this and tries to convince Tommy and Art's boss that the documents for Simon have been forged. Although soon after he leaves, Tommy shows his boss the letter that Pojanski wrote, confirming its legitimacy with his fingerprints all over it. Seeing as this is his last chance, Kudrow manages to get to the top of the skyscraper that was the pickup point for the helicopter which was going to take Simon into the witness protection program. However, just as the helicopter was about to take off, it's revealed that Art has been in it the whole time, and a fight ensues with Art going after Kudrow, and the task force takes down Burrell in a barrage of bullets and broken glass. Then, just as it seems like Kudrow may be winning the hand-to-hand combat between them, Simon walks along the ledge of the skyscraper and picks up a gun, handing it to Art, who finishes the job. The movie ends with Art and Stacey going to visit Simon, who is now in a foster home. They embrace as Simon has finally learned to trust him. So there we go, an action movie that makes very little sense, and quite frankly, from the very start, the entire premise seems wholly unsuitable for an autistic child to be at the centre of the story. In the movie, Simon is treated as a MacGuffin and not a real person. He's treated like luggage, something that slows down Art's progress, and sometimes he does things out of character just so the plot can move along. Mika Hughes, however, did spend time with autistic children at a special school to try and understand their behaviour and to try and see if he could imitate it accurately. Although being at such a young age, it could be safe to say that Hughes perhaps didn't get as much psychological insight into an autistic child, and perhaps the majority of his performance was down to mimicry. I will never comment on a child's performance in any of the movies that I talk about, but I can say that the head of the school which Hughes visited said that he was impressed by the performance, and it was even fooled into believing that he was actually autistic. However, at the end of the day, the premise may have rung some alarm bells, and although protest alone cannot stop the juggernaut that is Hollywood, it could be safe to say that some of the students and teachers may have questioned the logic behind the movie. This podcast may show, though, that movies don't usually go to such lengths to portray disability properly. Also, although it's hard to tell whether it's deliberate or not, there are moments that reflect a real autistic person's reactions, such as Simon's brief meltdowns and his stimming. However, these moments seem to come and go as the script requires them to happen, and it feels like moments of Simon's out-of-character behaviour are simply there just to move the plot along. All in all, Simon's role in the movie is never to teach the audience about autism, but only to serve to further mystify it as being something other, and Art's lack of understanding of the condition only aids to further the drama, as Simon is being seen as difficult to handle. Simon's involvement in the movie is just a way to make Art's job more difficult, and the presumably fast-moving pace of the plot suggests little time for him or the audience to understand what autism actually is. Okay, so let's get on to the trivia about Mercury Rising. At time of writing, it has a 6.1 rating on IMDb and 21% on Rotten Tomatoes. It made $93 million from a $60 million budget. Not an overwhelming success, but it at least made its money back. The movie also gave Bruce Willis a Razzie nomination for Worst Actor, alongside other films in which he appeared that year, such as for Armageddon and The Siege. Although it seems that the Razzie Awards Committee may have been gunning for Bruce Willis because of his reputation for doing loud, sensitive action movies. Although Willis's last Razzie nomination was rescinded after it was revealed that he had been diagnosed with aphasia. Personally speaking, I've always loved Bruce Willis, and among the movies that he did, there was always a flair for comedy which no doubt contributed to the success of films such as Die Hard and made Bruce Willis such a likeable protagonist. In fact, coming from TV series Moonlighting, this may be made him a more natural choice. Considering the comedic tone of the show, Bruce Willis gave an everyman appeal because, although he was often the only person on screen, his outspoken monologues were hilarious because he was just an ordinary man put into an extraordinary situation. Willis, although an unlikely action hero because of his comedic background rather than one in martial arts or bodybuilding, did manage to go out the Hollywood mould every now and then and show his comedy chops in films such as Death Becomes Her and Look Who's Talking, even though the latter became less appealing with each subsequent movie. However, there's a reason why he has such a good presence, and so much so that when he was cast in movies such as Moonrise Kingdom, North and The Sixth Sense, the audience response was usually, really? Although perhaps more North than in the other two. Anyway, back to the trivia. Mercury Rising is based on Ryan Douglas Pearson's 1996 novel called Simple Simon, a title in which in itself is problematic and perhaps outlines attitudes to autism at the time. However, it could be seen as a subversive title, because at face value Simon's behaviour may make him seem slow and unintelligent, whereas his autism gives him a perspective on life that others may not understand. It's also a play on the children's nursery rhyme of the same name, which is about a boy called Simon who goes to unusual and unsuccessful lengths to raise some money. Those who don't behave in the same way as others are often said to be seen as simple. People who like to march to the beat of their own drums or don't entirely get the thing that everybody else gets straight away are seen as stupid or abnormal. Even people who are physically different because of things such as cerebral palsy or being a wheelchair user can lead non-disabled people to think that they have learning difficulties as well as physical ones. The term may also be applied to Simple Jack, who is a character in the parody Tropic Thunder, which was a deconstruction of all the worst cliches that Hollywood has thrust upon the audiences over its existence. Ryan Douglas Pearson also wrote a sequel to Simple Simon, which was published in 2018 called Simon Sees, which again puts Simon Lynch in danger as an adult as he continues to run from the authorities. A novel which has been 2 decades in the making, and without having read it myself, one would hope that the mistakes being made about autism from the first movie are rectified in the book. However, after reading the blurb on Amazon which describes Simon's mind as damaged, I would suggest not. Also, the plot for Mercury Rising may have been inspired by a real-life event which happened in 1955. A newspaper ad ran a phone number for Santa Claus so children could call and talk to him. However, the number was 1 digit off and redirected callers to the Continental Air Defence Command, where a colonel was waiting for news on a missile strike. But instead he got a child asking if he could talk to Santa. However, after seeing the funny side and apologising to the first child for making him cry, the Continental Air Defence Command did start to update children on where Santa was if they did call the line by mistake. A tenuous link, perhaps, but it was a fun story. Also, I could tell you that Alec Baldwin was contractually obliged to appear in Mercury Rising because he backed out on a movie years before. He only took the movie because he wanted to avoid further legal issues. Film nerds may also want to know that Bruce Willis is indeed wearing the same bomb jacket that he wore in Pulp Fiction. And also, Michael Hughes would also go on to play an autistic child in an episode of Baywatch which was released in the same year, called Dolphin Quest. And among the actors that were considered for the lead were Nicolas Cage and George Clooney. Although I would imagine at the time it was the part of the career where Nicolas Cage could be picky about the roles he chose. Although I'm not really sure if that explains Con Air, Face Off and The Rock. Now, I thought I'd mention some famous autistic people, and in this case I won't be mentioning anybody who hasn't had an official diagnosis or any historical figures where it has been suggested that they may have been autistic. If you suspect that you are autistic and would like to find out just for peace of mind or to make your life better, then please contact a medical professional who can point you in the right direction. Firstly, the Oscar-winning actor Anthony Hopkins was diagnosed in 2014, although he did share that he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome until 2017. He's gone on to speak publicly about it and says although it's nice to know, it hasn't really affected his life in any significant way. Daryl Hannah also revealed in 2013 that she was diagnosed with autism as a child. Whereas the doctors wanted her institutionalised, Daryl Hannah's mother moved them to Jamaica instead, and frankly I think that's probably a better option. Also, ever since Greta Thunberg's activism was known about, she was public about her autism diagnosis. Having been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome as a young child, she considered it to be a superpower, and I'm sure with what she does in her life, she's made a lot of difference. Maybe because of her autism, or maybe just because of the tenacious determination to change the world. Also, British TV presenter Chris Packham has revealed that he was diagnosed with autism after he sought therapy. He has since then fiercely continued his activism, often speaking his mind on the natural world, and has gone on to present programmes for the BBC about neurodivergence, covering autism and ADHD thus far at the time of recording. He's best known for presenting TV programmes such as Springwatch, and back when I was a kid, he presented The Really Wild Show. Finally, Temple Grandin, an American academic, inventor and ethologist. Her speciality is in the behaviour of livestock, and she is a consultant to the livestock industry. She's also the author of many books about autism, including Emergence, labelled Autistic, published in 1986, Thinking in Pictures, published in 1995, and The Autistic Brain, Thinking Across the Spectrum, published in 2013. All of these books detailed how she has felt as an autistic person, and it's given great insight into what life must be like on the spectrum. She's also one of the first adults to speak openly about her autism, and there was a self-titled biopic starring Claire Danes as Temple Grandin, released in 2010 by HBO, which won the movie many Emmy Awards. And finally, I thought I would clear up some of the misconceptions about autism, because believe me, there are a lot of them, and people still believe them to this day. Firstly, autism is not caused by vaccines. This goes back years. There was a doctor, but I can't remember his name, and I don't want to give him any more of a platform by repeating it. But he said that he'd done the research and he concluded that vaccines were the cause of autism. That is not true. That has been disproven, and it's caused so much damage across the world because people have just readily believed it, meaning that children have been put in danger because they've not been able to get access to vaccines because their parents had fully believed something that just wasn't true. Secondly, there is a belief that only children are autistic. And that's not true either, because once you are diagnosed as being autistic, then that's it for life. It doesn't go away, you don't get into recovery, you just sort of get used to it, like everything. You have things that you're born with, any disability, and you learn to deal with it, like everybody does with whatever issues they have in their lives. Also, there's the misconception that all autistic people have some kind of special talents, and this is a thing that is constantly perpetrated by the media. You see a little article here and there about somebody autistic who has replicated a road map of somewhere to an intricate detail just by using their memory, and then suddenly the idea is that people are amazed by autistic people because it means that they're incredible and that they can do things that ordinary humans cannot do. The thing about that is that a lot of the time when there is a fixation on a particular interest, there is an intricate detail to what they can reproduce because they are so invested in it. It's not a special skill as such. It's just when you are so focused on something, then the product of that will be something to a level of which most people wouldn't understand. And that's what autistic people often do. There's also a misconception that autistic people have learning disabilities. This is often, again, perpetrated by film and media when they show autistic people who are non-verbal and they have difficulty controlling their behaviour and their physical movements, and that leads people to believe that they are not intelligent. And I can say that just because you're non-verbal doesn't mean you're not intelligent. You have things to say, but you're not able to say them, and therefore, thanks to assistive technology, it's been proven that autistic people and any kind of non-verbal disabled person is able to communicate if they're just given a chance. There's also the idea that autistic people are unsociable and are incapable of showing emotions. That's untrue as well. As I said, there are many levels. I mean, there are certain insecurities that autistic people have, that they feel that they can't communicate with other people and they can't form relationships or friendships because nobody really understands them as a person. But that's not true either, because anybody can form a relationship, and many autistic people do. There are autistic people who get married, they have children, and they live the same lives as anybody who isn't neurodivergent. There's also a misconception that only boys are autistic, and as I mentioned earlier, films such as Rain Man and Mercury Rising have only shown males to be autistic, and this couldn't be farther from the truth. As I mentioned earlier, there are women who do get diagnosed, but it's a common theory that women are better at masking than men are. So a lot of the time in women, the diagnosis of autism gets passed over because nobody can actually see any of the traits in them. There is a misconception that autism is caused by bad parenting, and this is a terrible misconception and also a very sad one, because it puts a lot of pressure on parents that if a child is diagnosed with autism, they blame themselves in a lot of cases. And there are some places that even suggest that when your child is diagnosed with autism, that you have to grieve for the loss of a child, which is awful and wrong. It should never be that way, and it's completely misunderstanding how to treat any person with autism. It's not caused by bad parenting. There is no real reason as to why autism manifests itself in people, but there is no way that any parent should ever blame themselves for having an autistic child. What you should do is love and accept them, and your relationship with an autistic child will be just as rewarding as any other child. I promise. Okay, that's the show for this week. Next week I'll be talking about Unstoppable, a biopic about Anthony Lopez, a one-legged wrestler who gained professional status in the sport. If you'd like to contact me, you can do so by searching for film-ability at Bluesky, by searching for film_ability at Instagram, and if you'd like to email me, my address is film-ability at outlook.com. And if you'd like to make a contribution to the things that I do here, you can find me at Patreon at patreon.com/film-ability. You can also find my book at Amazon on Kindle and paperback called Film Ability, A History of Disability in Cinema. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.